for this meeting. This meeting is being recorded. There will be opportunities for you to respond to questions as well as ask questions. Please direct any questions to the chat box. We do not have a Q&A function. You may also raise your hand if you would like to speak. The recorded meeting and all the resources in the presentation will be available on our website, which is hiplexington.com. We also have a live transcript going on if you would like to read some of the questions, or if you would like to reiterate what is being presented in the presentations. So today's agenda, we have Daphne Politis here with us. She is a local Lexington resident, and she will be helping us through the rest of the sessions starting from today till January, and she's the moderator for the session. Daphne, thank you for joining us. Just a quick overview of Daphne and her background. She's the founder of Community Circle. She founded this organization back in 1994. Her firm has services that help municipalities as well as organizations that are interested in developing strategic as well as master plans. The firm is dedicated to the idea that a highly participatory process leads to a better and more implementable plan, which actually is exactly what we were aiming for throughout the Hartwell rezoning initiative process. Daphne is the sole proprietor and the principal of Community Circle. She is an urban planner with significant experience in this area. She articulates priorities and develops a resource allocation and strategic plan that reflect these priorities. Daphne is a trained facilitator and a certified mediator. She uses a variety of methods to engage stakeholders and to integrate their input into the planning process as well as into resulting plan. And we hope that she'll really help us gather all the feedback that we require to get the zoning passed in March annual town meeting. With Daphne, today we also have Bob Buckley, who is the senior partner with Raymer and R&B, Raymer and Bronstein. Bob he is very well known in the circle because he has helped several of our companies in Lexington as well as other areas, other towns around us. We also have Ted Browitz, who is with Browitz Community Planning and Design. He's our in-house consultant who's been helping us with Hartwell rezoning initiative for the past couple of years. If you go to the next slide, I think we have a lot of things packed into the agenda today, and I really want to move ahead with the session. So today we'll be focusing on market feasibility, zoning bylaw, and design guidelines. Daphne, would you like to take over the slides?
Thank you, Sandhya. Next slide, please. So an introduction to the team. Next slide, please.
Sorry, I see Bob Creech is raising his hand. Does he need to call the meeting to order?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob.
I'm going to promote him to a panelist.
Yes.
Okay. Bob, can you unmute yourself?
Okay. Thank you. My name is Bob Creech, Chair of the Lexington Planning Board, and I call to order this meeting of the Lexington Planning Board. Today is Tuesday, December 2nd, 2020. It's 7 p.m. This meeting is organized by and managed by staff from both Lexington Economic Development and the Planning Office. Since this meeting covers zoning issues that the Planning Board may consider at a later time, and since more than 2 Planning Board members have expressed interest in attending the meeting, the open meeting law requires that this meeting also be posted as an official Planning Board meeting. Planning Board members may ask questions and offer input to this meeting, but the Planning Board will not conduct any business of its own this evening. All questions and comments should be directed to the organizers of the meeting. This meeting is being conducted remotely per Governor Baker's Executive Order of March 2020, and the meeting is being recorded. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I was also going to mention that the per governor's executive order. So we're lucky to be able to have this technology in order to continue the conversation. So in introduction to the team. So Carol Kowalski is Assistant Town Manager for Development. Amanda Loomis is the Planning Director. Sandhya Iyer is the Economic Development Director. Sheila Page, Assistant Planning Director. Casey Haggerty, Economic Development Coordinator. And Stella Carr, Sustainability Director. These are all the stellar staff members of Lexington's Planning and Development. Next slide, please. So as has been stated, this forum will be interactive, and the interaction will be done in 3 ways. Unfortunately, we can't be together all in the same room, but we can still talk to one another. You can raise your hand by using the raise your hand feature to speak. You can answer or ask questions in the chat. Just so you know, that's not anonymous. Your name will be associated with your comment, and the chat will be saved as a document. And we will be conducting polls, and those are anonymous. So your responses to the polls will be anonymous. Next slide, please. So let's just practice the chat function. Most of you have probably participated in some kind of an online platform since last March. We've been working and visiting and schooling on these platforms, but just to have a moment, what do you most look forward to doing once COVID is behind us? Just put it in the chat, please. And I'll start. Oh, Tom Schipple and I said the same thing at the same time. Travel, meeting friends in person, friends and family, spending time with our children. Me too. Visiting family. Gathering. Hugging loved ones. Playing music with other people. I miss listening to live music. Getting out of the house for anything. Yeah. I'm with you on that one. So it sounds like we all have the same desires. Hopefully we'll get there soon. The vaccine, it's on its way. So let's move to the next slide. And let's just practice the poll function for a moment in case you're not familiar with it. So later on, you'll be more comfortable. Which of these foods do you prefer? Cheeseburger, scallops, macaroni and cheese, sushi, lentils, steak, or lobster? You can only choose one. Oh, it says hosts and panelists cannot vote. So the rest of you that can vote, you need to just click on the little circle next to the food that you prefer. You want to give it a try? Is anyone having trouble doing this? If you want to ask for help. I can't show you how to do it because we can't vote. You just have to click on. Casey, do you want to show the how to what to click on? Put your cursor on it.
Yep. So there should be little radio buttons next to each of these options, and you can
Right.
click on those. That will
Click on it with your cursor.
Yes. Should be.
This is just a practice so that later when we have the real questions, you're able to participate in the poll. So someone,
I end the poll.
someone voted, they said, worked for me.
There's a submit button on the bottom, apparently.
Yes, that's right. There's a submit button on the bottom.
You have quite a few responses,
Okay.
Daphne, so I can end the polling if that's good.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so you want to show us that looks like, oh, I'm sushi too, 42%. But we've covered everybody, it looks like. So, so much for that. We've got the polling down. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So, Amanda?
Yep, can you hear me? So what we're looking at is the project vision. These are the planning principles that we would be moving forward when we are putting forward zoning and the design guidelines and any other efforts associated with the Hartwell Innovation Park efforts. So we want to make sure we capitalize on the natural environment towards both health and recreation, because there is a lot of open space, but there's also a lot of wetlands and other natural resources within this area that we want to take advantage of. Diversity of transportation options, not just a single family car or single occupancy car, but it's actually using other types of modes of transportation.
Oh, Amanda froze. Give her a minute. I can continue while she unfreezes. So establishing a new interface between Hartwell Avenue and its buildings with streetscape enhancements and lighting. So what that means is there's more connection between the buildings and the street. Diversifying land uses so that there are different kinds of activities occurring, so the neighborhood becomes richer. Fostering pedestrian scaled gathering spaces and mid-block connections, so that it's not all about being oriented to the car. There are spaces and places for pedestrians to walk and gather, as well as for bicyclists to go through. And because of an anticipated need for fewer parking spaces, because there are more ways of getting around and safer and more pleasant pedestrian and bicycling, as well as some transit options, that would be that there'll be more underutilized land that could be used for new development. And of course, establishing sustainable building and performance landscape standards as we move forward in accordance with the town's sustainability goals. Next slide, please. So why are we even doing this? To support Lexington in its efforts to compete with other towns that are vying to attract the regional demand for life science office and lab space. So there's a big regional demand and positioned, but not as well as it could be to compete with with other area towns. So we want to encourage state-of-the-art facilities for life science office and space by creating appropriate contemporary indoor spaces that support research and development in today's ways of doing research, providing both indoor and outdoor amenities that attract talent that is needed for this research and development to occur, and creating more of a sense of place so that feels like the area is more connected. It's more of a district rather than just a pass through with fragmented buildings on it. So this will result in helping Lexington to compete for these desired companies with potential benefits, including significant increase to the tax base, amenities and opportunities for socializing and recreating for Lexington residents too, not just for the employees, and opportunities for employment. Next slide, please. So all this will be adding value to working, playing, and living in Lexington. Sandhya, do you want to take over from here?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Daphne, for covering us. Today is one of the challenging technology days that we are having here in Lexington. So that's the future that we are trying to create, and the future is it's based on a lot of research that was done back in 2018. Casey, could you go to the next slide, please? So the process that we have has been, as I mentioned before, the vision and the market opportunities that were presented to us by David Campbell and Associates and Pam McKinney and Associates back in 2018. You have the report available on our website, and there are several other reports that were done, and it also has Ted's presentation and several other presentations that were conducted by consultants. So the community outreach process, or the public outreach process that we have, we've been going through the project timeline, the process, stormwater mitigation, as well as conservation. November 10th, we had Ted present some of the design guideline ideas. And today we'll be talking more of a version that will look and feel like what will be included in the draft design guidelines that will be released December 14th session. So today we'll be discussing about marketing opportunities, and Bob will be helping us look through the lens of what's happening out there, zoning and design guidelines. So hopefully Amanda will be able to join us back, and Ted will be giving us an overview of the design guidelines. December 7th, sustainability. I hope you'll be able to join us for that one as well. And finally, in January, we'll be discussing the draft zoning bylaw. By the way, you can, as discussed, you should be able to access the draft zoning bylaw by tomorrow on our website, hiplexington.com. A copy of that draft zoning bylaw is available on our website. Next slide, please. So what was the objective? Why who are our stakeholders, and why do we need to go through this with this process? Because we are not aiming at just creating those pretty buildings on Hartwell Avenue. We really want to reach out to each and every stakeholder group that we have: the landowners, the developers, the residents, the neighborhoods in Lexington, as well as the community at large in Lexington, and the staff and the permitting authorities, so that the process becomes streamlined and we get a clear, predictable, efficient permitting process that everyone agrees upon and looks forward to when the HIP district, or the Hartwell Innovation Project District, is gets created. Next slide, please. Future of Hartwell. So we will go through what is there currently and the current analysis. But what are we trying to achieve on Hartwell is more contemporary work environment. Again, I do want to remind that we are doing this in phases. So this time around, we are just talking about commercial rezoning efforts. We'll be coming back with housing in next annual town meeting. So what we are looking forward to in this round is more contemporary work environment, outdoor amenities for residents, improved pedestrian bike infrastructure, increased tax for town, buildings, and improved transportation. So those are the overarching goals that we have, that we really want to achieve on Hartwell, as that's our commercial corridor. Next slide, please.
So here's an opportunity for you to tell us if you've worked in a building on Hartwell Avenue, and whether you work there now or in the past, just so we have a sense of who's here with us today. So if you could please take the poll, just take a moment.
A few more seconds for those of you who haven't not voted yet.
A little more than over half have voted, yeah. So it looks like a few people, well, actually 2 people have worked or work there now. So most of us not. Thank you. Next slide, please. Amanda, you're on mute. You're not on mute, but we're not hearing you. She's going to join us by phone.
Hear me now?
Yes.
So how much land is actually available for redevelopment in Lexington? So what we're looking at is actually about 45 acres is just parking lots alone. So that means the drive aisles and the parking stalls. But then when you actually look at what is built in terms of existing footprints of the buildings that are existing today, there's about 31 acres of area. The median number of floors per building is 2. Next slide, please. And it froze again. Saudi, will you take the next one?
Yes, we are still able to hear you, by the way, Amanda.
Yep, I can't see the slides again. So
Okay, sounds good. So Amanda did a build out analysis, and we came up with the conclusion that out of the total acreage, 171.6 acres of the land is developable area, and 98.1 acre of total is the building footprint area currently. And the map that you can see right now is the green lines that you can see is the constraints that we have on Hartwell, and the red lines are basically the wetlands. And if you have not yet watched the session, or if you were not able to attend the session from October 29th, which was about constraints, I would ask you to go back and look at the slides, which gives us much more of an in-depth analysis of the constraints that we have on Hartwell with the irrigation easement, wetlands, and the stormwater. And you can look at some of the areas that are in blue, which are again are not developable. So the ones that we are talking, which can be developed, are the ones in yellow, and this does include 475 Bedford Street. The rest of the Hartwell is on Hartwell Avenue. The rest, so that's the build out analysis that that Amanda had created, so that we really get a sense of how much of the building footprint is available for us to work with for this rezoning effort. Next slide, please. So life sciences overview of the industry. So I really wanted to give a sense of where we stand as far as life sciences goes in Lexington. Life sciences. Let's start with some basic definitions of life sciences. Life sciences is basically anything to do with biology, biotechnology, health, human health. Anything possible is human health. So the first two circles, the green one and the orange one, were the first two areas, main areas: the biotechnology, biopharma, pharmaceuticals. So these were the first ones, basically, where we really saw the improvement. The pills that you see, or the or all the medicines that you see, are in the biotechnology area, whereas the medtech, medical devices and diagnostics, is the blood pressure monitors that you see, or if you go to any of these centers wherein they do their X-rays. So some of the big names are GE Healthcare, GE Health, Siemens. So these are medtech, med device companies, whereas biotech companies would be any pharmaceutical companies. For example, Dicerna is a pharmaceutical company. The third leg of this entire circle has come to digital health, artificial intelligence, and Bob will be giving us more overview about that. But it's again, it's a booming industry because everything is digital, everything is based on data. So all the technology that has been built, now people are requiring data, analyzing those data and how to use it for human health and betterment of human health is the stream of digital health and artificial intelligence. Next slide, please. Thanks, Casey. So what are we looking at when we say what's currently here in Lexington? We have like 30 life sciences companies in Lexington. 58% of these companies are therapeutic company. They basically develop therapies for health. We do have 8% of CDMO CRO who basically are contract development and manufacturing organization, and CROs are basically contract research organizations who help this industry grow and help manufacture the products that they develop. 11% of them are drug discovery company. Basically, they are the ones who are doing the core R&D, which is the research and development of these drugs, of which compound or which molecule can actually help with one or the other therapy that they are developing. And we do have some medtech presence as well here in Lexington. Next slide, please. So MassBio is a great organization. They are a membership-based organization who have been studying the biotech technology industry for the longest time. And they do not cover the med tech industry, but on an overall basis, they create this snapshot every year, and they just released a snapshot which suggested that 64% of all biotech companies that went public, almost 64% of them were outside of Boston and Cambridge, that raised cumulatively $676 million. And let's look at Lexington. So Translate Bio, $122 million. iSpecimen, $21 million. Keros Therapeutics, $96 million. And Kinex Pharmaceuticals. Sorry, my internet is slow. $153 million. So what does that really mean for us? Could you go to the next slide? So growth. So these guys are really, really making a lot of, they are raising this significant amount of funding because they are going from one phase to the other, phases in the sense that from researching a molecule to developing that molecule. So if a life sciences company needed like 10 people to research, now they need 100 people to actually develop a prototype. And once they develop that, to bring that to market, they'll need 500 more people to do that. So that means that they raise money, they go to the venture capitalists, and they go to, they bring their company on the NASDAQ, and they offer the initial public offering. So all those things means that they need more square footage, they need more space. So currently, what is Lexington looking at? The asking rent is $27. That's what we are looking at. And the market rent is, on an average, it's $42. Let me go to the next slide, and that will actually give you the breakdown of what we should be looking at. So the best example that we have, the 4 properties that are either under development or they just got developed, is 75 Hayden, 20 McGuire, 1050 Waltham, and 4 McGuire. So 75 Hayden, it's fully rented out. Average asking rent is $67, from 42 to 67. 20 McGuire, Dupree Associates, the estimate is like $43 currently. But if they redevelop that property, that can actually double or at least significantly go to $73. And similarly, the same story follows. As you can see, they are either around $33 or $32, and they would increase that much. So what's happening in, yes?
There are a couple of questions with regard to this. Okay. One is, if you mentioned a significant increase in the tax base, can you put a number on that? Will the tax revenue eliminate the gap between residential tax and commercial tax?
I can go over that slide. I do have a slide that that joins the dots with the tax rates. So what's the current asking rent for Waltham, Burlington, and Bedford? So again, I'm just doing the ones that are either in development or they just got released, and everything is around $67 because it's an average. So anywhere between 65 to 78 is what the asking rent is currently. Next slide, please. So amongst the 31 properties that are lab ready in Lexington, the availability or the vacancy rate, actually, let's start with the vacancy. It's just 8.1%, and the available space is 6.4%. What's the difference between availability and vacancy? Is basically the difference is the rentable building area, so the vacancy is a bit high, but the availability might be less. So it's again 6.4% area, but most of these are built in 1980s. So how many of them are like the life sciences ready that can actually accommodate the life sciences companies? That's pretty low. It's almost 2%. Next slide, please. So commercial tax rate. This is the slide that that really captures the whole story, because we really want to compare it with the other municipalities. If you see apples to apple comparison, Waltham and us, because it's 31 properties versus 34 properties. Availability for Waltham is 19.50, which is high. They have things ready to go on the market right now, and their commercial tax rate is low. So most of the life sciences companies actually are asking that to look at, I mean, they're going to Waltham. We do have examples of that as well. Burlington, they don't have a lot of, they do have a lot of commercial real estate. I don't say that they don't, but out of that, life sciences or lab ready is just 6 properties. Bedford, 20, they're capturing the industry very significantly. That they have the highest tax rate, but we are seeing a lot of spike in availability in Bedford. And the other thing is some of these companies are coming all the way from California, and they're capturing Bedford, Woburn, Burlington, and outskirts of I would say Reading and Beverly, almost going to Beverly.
I guess someone is wondering if we know if the spike in availability correlates with anything. Do we know?
So yes, so the spike in availability signifies that most of the properties are ready for occupancy. Right now, the occupancy rate, most of the buildings are occupied. There's hardly any vacancies in Lexington. Most of them are like already occupied, and the more that we have available, generally, if you see the availability for Cambridge, it's less than 2%. We really don't want to go that low, but we don't want to go as high as 33% either. So that's the boundary. So we are presently on a good stable note, I would say, at 6.4%. We don't want to have a high vacancy rate. Market that we really want to capture is the ones that are coming outside of Cambridge and Boston, but we do not have space for them. So if I give you an example of Translate Bio that actually raised significant amount of money, but so they currently have, I think, 60,000 square feet of property on 29 Hartwell Avenue, but they do not have enough space to grow or move out of that space. So what did they do? They went to Waltham because they had a lab-ready life sciences building, which they can occupy in 2021, and that's happening. I think they have signed a lease for 120,000 square feet. So do we have that capacity? No, we do not. So at this rate, we'll be stagnant in a year or two, because most of the growth that is happening, we need to capture it by 2022 or 2023. because these guys sign a lease of like 10 years, and most of them would require, life sciences companies require, like, if I capture 10,000 square feet, I need an additional buffer of 5,000 just in case I grow. I need that 5,000 square feet. So generally they sign a lease of 15,000 square feet, not just 10,000. So that's the market that we really want to capture, and that's happening in Waltham and Burlington and Bedford currently, and Watertown and Arlington. But Watertown, Arlington, the asking rate is like 78 to $89 per square feet. So our market right now is more saturated on the 128 belt. Any more questions? I'm happy to keep on going with the rate and what's the significance of this growth and why now. But I really want to hear from Bob, who can give us a broader perspective of why now.
Am I live? I'm live. Okay, let me give you a little bit of my background. And what I say tonight is my experience. It's not necessarily going to translate into what you may want to hear, but I think you should hear it. So I think you're doing this the right way, which is to take a look at this and try to anticipate where you want to be. As I tell a lot of my clients, as well as municipalities I deal with, planning is a 20-year horizon. So good planning is 20 years. So if anything, the last 10 months have told us that everything can change very quickly and very dramatically. So I think you have to incorporate flexibility into your planning initiative, so that what you see today may have to change 5 years from now, but the template allows that change, because that will put you in a competitive advantage vis-a-vis other communities. Projects that I've done in Lexington, I still refer to it as Shire. The old Cubist site on Hayden Ave, and other projects around the old Sun Microsystems in Burlington, 3rd Avenue in Burlington. I'm just wrapping up about 1 million square feet in Marlboro, which is the old HP site, the old compact computer right on 495. So my specialty is these large, I want to say, master plan type projects. So what I've found that has been very effective in these projects is to solicit as much information as possible as at the beginning. So as you put into place the governing rules and regulations, they strike that balance between flexibility and targeted markets. Every community does not necessarily want the same corporate environment or the same uses. I will say this: Lexington historically has been a very attractive life science biofarm community. I will also say that that is the past. My experience today has been that a lot of these companies are looking for speed and agility, flexibility, and they have products that they have to get to market quickly, and they will go less. An address is still important, but it's not the most determinative factor that will drive the equation to fulfillment. So do what you're doing and try to focus on flexibility. Why? It's only going to accelerate in the region. So I think that the life science companies are looking at a regional approach, be it Burlington, Chelmsford, Bedford, you name it. Woburn is actively trying to court the industry. And what a lot of my clients will look at when they're doing projects is how quickly can we get in, how quickly can we get under construction and built, and how flexible will future growth be if we need that growth. And that's twofold. It's one, product growth, and number two is acquisitions. A lot of these companies merge, acquire, and consolidate, and they either locate here or they go elsewhere, but you want them to come here. So you have to have that flexibility built in. What I see in the marketplace right now is life science, as everyone is aware, is growing. I think there is a migration out of Cambridge and the metropolitan Boston area, and a number of reasons for that. Some of it is cost. Some of it is what we've been through in the last few months, that the the aspect that grows, that drives this industry. Talent does not necessarily want to be in the urban core, and wants the flexibility to have a different environment. And if there's anything, these companies listen to their employees. The housing costs, albeit not Lexington perhaps, somewhat lower, and the commutes are shorter. Their employees don't want to sit for 45 to an hour to commute back and forth. So you want to be able to live in your environment. And surprisingly, parking is free and abundant. An offshoot of that, what I call advanced manufacturing, is taking innovative technologies in the manufacturing process, such as robotics, laser technologies, and cybersecurity. All of those industries are related in some way, or with perhaps maybe even cybersecurity, to the life sciences industry. And that is a rapidly growing industry in the greater Lexington area. Some of that is because of the base. Northeastern has made a big footprint with their campus in Burlington and the technologies and what they are doing there. And I think I may have mentioned this on our prep call. I referred to it as the parasite, or the whale is in the water and the parasites glom onto it. All the attendant industries that will feed off of some of these technologies need to locate in and around their host. So that is a rapidly expanding area. And I think that's unique to this area vis-a-vis other areas of the Commonwealth, because of the technology that is situated in the greater Lexington environment. And as I said, a lot of it is because of the base, and also some of the universities. Another big area is logistics. And some of that has a negative connotation, and I'm not necessarily focusing on that tonight, but there's logistics, as we're seeing if you watch the news daily now. How do you distribute a product, a vaccine? How do you coordinate the supply chain? And there's one thing that the last 10 months have shown us, is that the supply chain in this country for the next decade will be a major focus of every industry, that we're not going to allow that supply chain to be broken or controlled by third parties. So you're going to see quite a bit of development of that. And it's not the old trucking terminals. These logistic facilities are technologically marvels. I mean, the shell building, or the building itself, pales in comparison to the equipment and the logistics or the technology that's put inside these buildings. And the life sciences need those for product distribution, and that is going to be a major growth industry. You know, we all read about the Amazon, and frankly, I'm doing a number of Amazon projects myself, but two of them that they're just robotics. Amazon just developing their own robotics, and the technology is just mind-boggling. And the final component with the suburbs, where I see a lot of growth occurring, is housing. But I really don't want to get into that tonight, but housing is critical, because a lot of the employees and talent that is attractive to these industries may not be resident or from this area, and they may be locating from a university or being recruited to come here and work in the facilities, and don't know anything whether they're going to stay here permanently or whatever. And so the diversity of housing product is critical. So what the next slide, I guess. What's driving it? As I said, talent. I mean, these industries are going less was in the past with the address, but more for where's the talent located. And it's the flip side of that equation is just the opposite. As you develop these clusters, the talent wants to locate near the clusters. So if you do it right and you develop what I refer to as a sizzle in the industry, the talent will want to come to the area, and as a result, the industry leaders will want to have the footprint in that location. I also want to point out, when I talk about talent, I'm not necessarily just talking about the biochemists, the PhD scientists. I'm talking about the lab technicians, the the support personnel. This is a very rich area because of its academic standards and the flexibility of some of the institutions in this area to provide and supplement the talent needs of these companies. For instance, I mean, between the community college, Middlesex community, or the technical schools, the University of Lowell, Northeastern even, some of these schools will devise programs tailored to the needs of some of these host industries. And if you don't think that's driving people to look at these sites and look at this area, it's one of the more compelling reasons to locate in this region. And surprisingly, these major industries take advantage of it, but most people aren't aware of the flexibility that these universities and community colleges and technical schools will do or work with these host companies to devise programs to make them successful. Diversification of location. You know, we saw this after 9/11, that it may not be wise to locate all in one area. So many companies are now having operations, or looking for operations that are spatially distant and in different locales, so that if there's a problem in one area, the other area, other location can supplement. That is a consideration. Diversification of risk, I guess you'd call it. Cost, although cost is rising, it still is less than what you would pay in Kendall Square. There's also an argument that the lifestyle in the 128 belt is a little more reasonable, and you can still hopefully in the future get back down into the city very easily, and that's the convenience factor. And as I spoke to the training. The next slide. One of the things that I spend a lot of time with prospective clients and developing these properties is the amenities. They're critical. And it's the interaction. When I say interaction facilitated, you have a highly motivated, a highly interesting workforce that wants to be able to congregate and interact with their peers. And how do you facilitate that? What kind of amenities do you want to have on a campus or a area or regional program, as you're considering for Hartwell? And they're different than the amenities that I perhaps would have liked when I started out, not as a lawyer, but I was an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, so I had a different environment. But you have to think as they think. What is it that is it areas that they can congregate and eat and chat, or after work get together and have a bite to eat and maybe meet some people? They're very desirous. They're very social, and social media and different activities. You know, I represented Spear Street Capital out of San Francisco on a project they bought out here, and they took an area that was prior to that just a small green and turned it into a gathering area where they would have horseshoes, or they'd have theme nights. A lot of these entities hire professional planners who plan activities for their employees. So those are the amenities that you have to factor into the equation, and they do drive the equation. And I said variety, accessibility. One of the things you'll find is if you're doing a large project, a large area project, is where are the amenities located? It's you know, you can't put them all down at one end. You want to disperse them throughout the project, or you want to create spaces that are hardscape and conducive to people congregating, open space that is different, where someone could sit on an Adirondack chair and read or work on their computer. But it's, you know, you just don't want it all located at one area. You got to disperse it throughout the planning phase of the project, because people will not venture out and travel great distances and then turn around and come back. You just have to, and it has to be flexible, and that should be in your zoning, and that should be one of the considerations. Disperse the open space or the accessible or the congregation space, interaction space throughout the project. And one of the things that, you know, if you appear before planning boards, there's always the open space. Well, you know, there's a lot of confusion sometimes. Open space is not necessarily green space. Open space can be areas that you invite people to, as I said earlier, congregate. You know, you can do green space for recharge and environmental issues, and certainly a project with green space is appealing, but you don't want to do it at the expense of negating what you're trying to create. You could still achieve the environmental objectives that open space was originally contemplated to achieve through technology, and then still provide hard space for people to enjoy and as I said earlier, congregate. I'll give you an example. 3rd Avenue, we have a lot of what I call hardscape for people to congregate. That's 3rd Avenue in Burlington. But we have a condition in the overall master plan that as a project develops, the recharge has to increase post-development by at least 10%, no matter how much open space, hard space you put in. You always have to achieve a 10% addition to recharge. So there are ways of achieving sensitive issues, but also balancing it with trying to create that sizzle that makes a project go. Next charge, next slide. Permitting programs. I will tell you that every client that I'm dealing with now that's looking for a major campus is how quickly can we get in? And time is a critical component because it's a rush to market. If they have a innovation, they suffer from patent restrictions that limit the time that they can make money on these, and they want to be up and running and working on technologies that are, you know, as quickly as possible. That is critical. Timing and certainty is in the permitting process is a major component. But it shouldn't be at the expense of diligence. Most of these companies, surprisingly, when they come to a community, which by the way, they don't necessarily knock on your door anymore, they do their research in a conference room or an office, maybe in San Francisco, and they analyze all of your regulations. If you have well-tuned and well-focused regulations, what you're communicating to the potential user is you understand their business. If you understand their business, they have a degree of comfort that you'll understand why you do things a certain way and what you need, rather than spending time educating the community as to what you need and why you need it. And that adds months and months and months to a project, which is a principle to drive that user somewhere else. I'll give you just a little war story. If you're familiar with the old Necco candy factory in Revere, which was, I think, about 900,000 square feet, the city of Revere was, when Necco closed, it was an economic, it was disastrous. They were the largest employer in the city, and they were looking at a way to preserve or create more jobs. And what I said to them was, take your zoning and make it more reactive, and think the way that the potential user thinks. So, for instance, if you have an issue, you may Google it. So why not? We wrote some zoning that provided for e-commerce distribution by innovative means of technology, such as, but not limited to, robotics, whatever. So if I'm a user and I'm in California and I'm looking for communities in Massachusetts to locate a facility, and I type in innovative distribution, Revere comes up. And as a result, it turned into a major employment Amazon facility there. Now, that's not necessarily what Lexington would be looking for, but you have to start thinking the way that your users think, or the companies that you want to attract, and try to get them to put you on their list. As I said earlier, Lexington has always been noted for a life science cluster environment, but that's becoming less and less important as the rapidity of the technology forces them to move quickly. One of the things I talked about with the team before this is flexibility of design. I always used to say to communities when they would have a floor area ratio, or FAR, that they use that to control density. Yeah, then there are other ways you can control density. What you tell me when you put an FAR on a project, you're telling me to just deliver a vanilla project, because if I want to have a industry noted statement for my reception, my FOIA, my sense of arrival, I'm penalized because all of that area in the atrium or the lobby is counted against my FAR. So I'm more inclined to say, can I do a square building, a rectangular building, or limit my deducts? So flexibility of design can lead to some very interesting and very innovative product, which again is an incentive for others to want to be part of that. I mean, that's how Kendall Square started. I'm probably in the minority. When I go to Kendall Square, I'm fascinated by the rooftops. I actually think they're art forms. When you look at all of the exhaust or the piping on the roof, you can look at that and I say that, in my opinion, I look at that and I say that's pretty interesting. And I think that the clientele or the scientists are stimulated by that environment. But I'm not saying you have to do that. You just have to provide for the opportunity that 10 years from now, that may be an attractive attribute for an entity looking to locate in Lexington, but you don't permit it. And you may not want to. Every community is entitled to their own personal or public policy statements as to what they want to have. But if you're trying to get that and it doesn't exist under your regulatory scheme, you're going to lose it. Just one final story. I did the district in Burlington, which is the old New England Executive Park. And I was on a site walk with a dean of the Conservation Commission. She had been there for years. And she was commenting how she finds the the urban technical design not appealing. But she said, you know what? It's not my call anymore. It's what the young professionals want and they're excited about. And I understand that that's what's attracting the businesses. And with that in mind, go for it. So those are the questions you have to ask. So I will be quiet now. I think I've been running off quite a bit. Again, those are my thoughts. That's what I see in the industry. I'll end with one thing. Everyone is saying that office is dead and office is problematic. I think office space right now is going through a metamorphosis. It's going to change. But as I said earlier, as these industries come in and as they develop, they're going to need the professionals. They're going to need the consultants. That, you know, when you do an IPO or your human resources or your market reps or whatever, you're going to need a place to house them. So office is going through a change, and it's a dramatic change, and it may not require the same spacing requirements that you have today, but in the future, I do think there's going to be a demand for office. So as you develop a template, don't lose sight of that support component to any type of activity, and that support component will grow proportionally to the host. And So I'm not as pessimistic about the long-term prospects of office. I think right now there is some concerns about office, but I think that's more because the office that was built, it doesn't respond to today's market demands, which, if you think about it, in 10 months, we have turned the model upside down. We have turned the model, at least in that retail and office, upside down. And I don't think we're going back to what it was, but I do think that there will be a phoenix. So something will come out of the ashes. There's always going to be a need for those entities that support this type of industry. Thank you.
You're muted, Sandhya.
You're on mute, Sandhya. You're on mute now.
I am? Oh,
We can't hear you.
you can hear me?
We can hear you, Bob. We can't hear Sandhya.
Oh.
Do you want to give it one more try? We can, let's take a look at recapping the November 10th design guidelines meeting. Next slide, please. So at that meeting, it was the design guidelines, the concept of design guidelines was introduced, and it's about working in coordination with the zoning so that they're not separate. Some towns make the mistake of not referring one to the other and not coordinating them. And so that creates gaps and unintended consequences. What this does is it removes the anxiety and uncertainty on the part of the town, but also on the part of the developers in terms of providing clear expectations and appropriate and acceptable solutions to the site context and goals for the district, so that it's a district-wide approach and so that it's a cohesive sense of place and it's appropriate to the site and the context and that overall vision that Bob was just talking about. So design guidelines tell us how to apply principles. They're recommendations that provide instructions on how to convert those principles into rules. They are to remain flexible, so they're not prescriptive, but they do provide some sort of boundaries. And sometimes redevelopment is encouraged by providing incentives. And also it's about the experience as an individual. Humans experience development at the street level. So it's about building setbacks, parking locations, the scale of the building, the massing of the building, the location of the gathering spaces, the connections, the pedestrian and bicycle connections, not just throwing around, FAR numbers. And photos and graphics and drawings or diagrams are used to illustrate these expectations so as to have some common understanding of what the words mean. Next slide, please. So we wanted to just take a moment and ask you, the last time that you were on Hartwell Avenue, you walked, you biked? So as we expected, most of you drove through, but 15% biked and some walked, 8%, 3% never go there, and 8% other. So just curious, what other experience of Hartwell did you have? If you want to put that in the chat, that might be interesting. Next slide, please. And now Ted, where are you, Ted? Ted Brovitz.
Right here. Can you hear me?
There he is, going to present the design guidelines.
Thanks, Daphne. Well, I think Bob, you did a great job in sort of explaining the market realities of what's happening in the tech industry and in office and so on. And I think that one of the points you made is really sort of important to make here today's economy, you really need to be flexible with your zoning. You need to adapt to the market the way it is today. And I think that's really what we've done in the recent amendments that were made here to the Hartwell area. You know, we were sort of locked in that 1980s pattern of suburban industrial parks or business parks. And that doesn't really work for today's interest in terms of life science and technology. And so reducing the minimum lot size and eliminating the floor area ratio and narrowing the frontage requirements and all of this really creates a new opportunity on properties that for the most part have some development potential left. In fact, in some cases, a lot of development potential left. And so we've just created that new opportunity to fulfill those opportunities for reinvestment in some of these properties. At the same time, there were some additional amendments made to this section, which made specific that we want to see quality open spaces. There's a 15% requirement now for outdoor amenity spaces, whereas in a lot of zoning ordinance, you have this nebulous 10% open space, but that tends to be very low quality of space and really not usable. Here, it specifically mentioned that we want to have quality open spaces. And also there are some incentives to create sustainability in terms of the design of the property, design of the buildings, and achieving a LEED certification, as well as avoiding on-site combustion for HVAC system. So I think this is a good sort of starting point in terms of the basic zoning requirements out on HIP. But now we have to pair that with some good quality design guidelines. Next slide. So as I mentioned, where zoning regulations cover permitted uses and dimensional standards and parking requirements and so on and so forth, the design guidelines really get at the qualities of these spaces, and specifically the quality of the site layout, landscaping, design of the buildings, quality in different types of open spaces, and then the interface between private development and then the public realm, which would be the public streets, things like the bikeway, if there's any open spaces, common spaces, parks, that sort of thing. The relationships that are built between private property, private investment, and public resources and streets and so on. So basically, we're putting this all together, and we sort of have 5 major parts to this new design guideline that we're working on. The principles and purpose. And the purpose statement is there below, but basically I sort of put that in a framework already, creating the quality and sort of vetting out some of the quantitative requirements in the zoning and making sure that that's integrated into the development itself. And specific to Hartwell, the applicability is just for Hartwell. So for design guidelines that we would create here versus other places like Town Center, they're very different. I mean, they're very different in terms of their scale, in terms of their combination of uses. And so we want to make sure that these design guidelines are specific to our objectives and our goals for the Hartwell area. And then, of course, there's site improvements, working on design guidelines and signage. Those are the basic categories that we're addressing. And we want to focus on some of the key components under these different categories. So next slide. So in terms of purpose and principles, the guiding principles are sort of laid out there: sustainable growth, compact, human scale design, mix of uses, flexible spaces. As Bob mentioned, there's a growing segment in life sciences and tech, but also there's going to be a need for office space going forward. Architectural context, the context of our historic town center is very different than the context here on Hartwell. Active open spaces, quality landscapes, multimodal transportation, and economic opportunity. And really one of the main objectives here is to create a strong relationship between the private realm, the new buildings, and the public realm. And in this particular case on Hartwell, we have a great opportunity to do this because by and large, the best opportunities for new development is in front of the existing buildings. The first segment of Hartwell A typical building today is about 75 to 100 feet setback from the street right away. That creates a real opportunity for reinvesting and developing forward, but at the same a strong relationship with the street itself, the sidewalks, the bikeway, all the things that could potentially go into the transportation improvement plan for Hartwell. So that's where the public realm meets the private realm, and that's where our best opportunities are to create a much more walkable district and a lot more vibrant district by allowing development, but also at the same time creating quality outdoor amenity spaces. Next slide. So we talk about some of the key components under these different categories, starting with the site improvements. We want to make sure that the layout of the development is clustered and basically tight and creating the best opportunities, but also creating good connections between not only the office space or the building space, but making connections to the streets and the sidewalks and to on-site amenities such as the plaza. You can see in this example here on the right, there's a large plaza between the two main buildings. There's actually some open space on one of the buildings on the rooftop. And the parking is behind the buildings and very close to both of them and has a separate access. So it's a very efficient site where people come in, they get out of their cars in the parking garage, they walk across the bridge or across the plaza into the buildings, and the front of the building is oriented towards a street, and there's commercial, retail, restaurant on the ground floor. So it's really a very well put together site where parking is sort of hidden behind, and the front facade is oriented toward the street. And you've got some really magnificent open spaces to work with, as well as the sustainable applications. You can see the stormwater detention area there, which serves both as a drainage system, but also as a public amenity as well. Next slide. So again, we want to make sure that the buildings are oriented towards the street, create that sort of walkable district, create a relationship with the sidewalk and people that are driving or walking or biking up and down Hartwell. We want to make sure that the buildings are hiding the parking for the most part. If they can't do that completely, we want to make sure there's some good screening and landscaping because when you have parking between buildings or in front of buildings, you really create a gap between people walking and biking and the buildings themselves. And so we want to make that connection as strong as possible. Next slide. Site access, you know, it's a good thing to do is to separate access for pedestrians and cars. We want to make sure that it's safe for people walking to the buildings or driving to the buildings, placing the parking lots behind the buildings or parking structures, having separate accesses or even shared accesses between adjacent properties is a good thing, because anything that you can get off of Hartwell or is combined on Hartwell in terms of driveways creates less conflicts with pedestrians, which creates a better walking environment. Next slide. Having good internal circulation and creating the opportunity for shared parking. Here's an example here on the right of a development where you can see the circulation, the pedestrian circulation is very well marked and safe. You know, you've got walking corridors in the parking lot. You have good crossings at all the intersections. You've got a connection to the public sidewalk. You have connections to open spaces. And so done a really good job at making sure that it's safe for everybody, whether you're driving or walking from the street or within the development, easy and safe for people to get around. And that's really a critical thing that we want to address in the design guidelines. Next. And then finally, parking. Parking, you know, as been mentioned, there's a lot of excess parking on Hartwell. And a lot of the parking, thankfully, is located behind the building. So it creates a good opportunity to create internal connections so that there's a possibility of shared parking. Also creates an opportunity to do structured parking that could be connected or nearby the buildings. So there's a good flexibility to create sort of a capacity for parking between lots and on individual lots that can minimize the footprint of the development, protect the wetlands that are behind that, but also serve to to potentially share with other adjacent properties and uses. All with that hiding that from the street, so that the parking is behind the buildings and the buildings are oriented towards the streets and the sidewalks. Next. And of course, landscaping. And in terms of landscaping in the design guidelines, we want to make sure that there's a hierarchy of applications. So we want to make sure that there's good gateways and entryways in terms of the landscaping. We want to coordinate on-site landscaping with the street frontages, the improvements that are going to be made to Hartwell themselves, so that there's compatibility and there's permeability as you walk off the sidewalk onto the properties, that there's good perimeter screening and buffering as applicable. Of course, if you're anywhere near residential areas, you want to make sure that there's good screening and buffering. And we want to make sure we integrate sustainable elements into the landscape. So that, for example, if we're creating plazas and terraces, we want to make sure that's permeable material so that things can drain on-site rather than off. And things like landscaping in the parking lots, shade trees that provide not only shade, but also absorb a lot of water. So it's important that we integrate sustainable applications in our landscaping. Next slide. And then finally, site amenities. This is a very important part of the design guidelines, making sure that there's a template for a variety of different types of outdoor amenities. Everything from plazas that might be in front of the building so that there's an opportunity to spill out onto the sidewalks or expand the sidewalks where people can dine and sit. It can be programmed for music and other types of events, as well as having green spaces, people where they can recreate, they can play a game of Frisbee or have a barbecue or what have you. So it's going to be a combination, I think, of green spaces and hard spaces, but all intended for passive and active recreation and for gatherings. Slide. And then site lighting, we want to make sure that it's consistent, it's uniform, it's efficient. You're using a minimum amount of light necessary to provide safety for people that are visiting or working in these buildings. But at the same time, making sure that we don't have spillover onto adjacent properties or any impact on the night sky. So we want to make sure that it's uniform, but it's minimal, that's safe, and that it doesn't have impacts on surrounding areas. Next slide. So in terms of the buildings, I think it's very important to address in the design guide the massing. And what we mean by that is breaking up the building components. I mean, a lot of these tech buildings and life science buildings are very large buildings, and they tend to be pretty uniform if they're not articulated and not if you don't break up the masses. So here's just some examples of some larger buildings there where you're breaking up the masses into smaller pieces so it doesn't look so intimidating, and that you're creating at the same time a workable building, but sort of again making a presence on the street, building up the corners, varying the facades and the materials so that it really appears to be a smaller structure. Next slide. And then the facade composition, again, making sure that there's some variation in the facades. You want to avoid long blank facades. You want to make sure that there's a distinction between the functional differences. So for example, at ground level where you might have some commercial activity such as a restaurant or so, you want to make sure that that's very permeable, that there's a lot of glass, that there's a lot of window space, and that it pours out onto the sidewalks or the plazas. Whereas the upper floors, you might have more of a commercial office feel, smaller windows, doesn't have to be as articulated. So there's important to make sure the facades represent the types of uses at different levels that you intend to have in those buildings. Next slide. And then roof forms and uses. We want to make sure that we provide the opportunity for sustainable elements to be on the roof, whether it's green roofs or solar panels, wind turbines, and also to provide the opportunity for rooftop open spaces. Here's an example on top that actually came from Louisville, and it's a restaurant that covers the whole top of a parking structure. And it's one of the most popular places in town. And it really is something else. You have a 360-degree view of the city. And the upper floor of any of these parking garages is always the least used, but it can make a really nice gathering space or even a commercial operation if you've got the space to do it. Next slide. Finally, talking about signage, you want to make sure that there's good signage, it's quality signage, particularly out by the street. We want to present ourselves well along Hartwell, and we want to make sure that there's good harmony with whatever happens within the right-of-way in terms of fixtures and treatments, as well as what happens on the individual sites, so that there's consistency between ground signs and building signs and directional signs. Next. In terms of site and building signs, there's, in terms of, a lot of, interesting types of applications happening out there. The sign in the right corner there, lower corner, is from the district in Burlington. It's an interesting way to sort of advertise the address of the buildings. It's sort of interesting. A lot of these business parks are now using what we call monument signs. So they're low signs closer to the road so that both pedestrians and cars can see them without having to be big, tall signs. And typically they're stone monuments with signage on top of it, which is very attractive. They're landscaped and so on, well lit, externally lit. And then there's larger signs on the buildings, such as the one down the Residence Inn there, with consistent lighting, not overwhelming, but tastefully done and consistent with other buildings that are on the site and integrated with the landscape. Next one. Just some more examples of signage, building signage and site signage. Again, at the ground level along Hartwell, you might see some restaurants and shops, and where you want to have your traditional wall signs, maybe some projecting signs so people can see it as they're walking up and down the sidewalk, whereas the building itself might have larger signs further up onto the building. Taller buildings would have them up on top, but all integrated as part of the overall design of the building. Next slide. And then finally, and this is more of a sort of a thing that the town and developers would work on together, is really sort of a wayfinding system for Hartwell as we put together the plans for Hartwell transportation improvements. Part of that is picking different lighting poles and decorative fixtures and benches and furniture and that sort of thing. But a big part of that could also be how we sort of brand Hartwell, and banners is a good way of doing that, adding sort of a personal touch to our district. So that's something to think about for the future, is and something we would just touch on in the design guidelines, is ways to sort of brand Hartwell and create sort of a wayfinding system in terms of banners, in terms of directory signage, so that people can get into the district and feel like they're in a distinct place in Lexington. And that's it. I'll turn it back over to Daphne.
Thank you, Ted. So this is some of what we've heard in previous forums about the look and feel of Hartwell. What do you feel are the top three most important? And we'll give you an opportunity in the chat to also say if you think there are additional things that are important. So what are the three most important features? Oh, there's a lot of consensus here. Oh, look at that. So one of the questions in the chat was a concern about the competition with the town center. And one of the comments in another forum was that, reflecting a modern aesthetic as opposed to the historic one in the town center. But it's also a very different kind of, place that we're talking about creating. And so, these are some of the things we need to think about. So it looks like, well, people are still responding, but it looks like the green space and the mature trees and nature paths are very important. And the modern aesthetic, as well as the more condensed parking. Okay. So if you were thinking about Hartwell today, what would make it more vibrant? Ted just went over quite a few of these. And we just gave you the poll. Now, is there anything else that you can think of that wasn't in those responses that were, based on public input? No, we're saying anything else you can put in the chat. So here someone is saying, find individual improvements that don't feel like a singular entity rather than part of a complex urban fabric. So it's like, yeah, so being more integrated. People who are not in cars. So pedestrian oriented spaces. So next slide. So is Amanda with us?
I am with us. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, we can.
Okay, great. Awesome. So as Sadia mentioned previously, tomorrow we are going to be releasing the draft edition of the HIP zoning bylaw. At the special town meeting, there were provisions that were approved by town meeting relative to the Hartwell Bedford Street area. That includes the amendments to the zoning map, dimensional tables, and some other provisions that were related to building height, layout, and also sustainability. Those items are actually going to be kept throughout this because, as we said previously during town meeting and other efforts, was that those kind of dovetailed into the efforts that we were doing here as staff. The other thing that we need to make sure that everyone understands is that just because we are amending the zoning bylaw, this does not allow developers to not go through conservation review. All wetlands and all conservation jurisdiction will still remain intact. So projects will probably have to go through site plan review with the planning board, and then also go through the Conservation Commission. The one thing that we learned from a previous project that we had was the collaboration between the planning board and the Conservation Commission helped actually strengthen the review of that project. But what we are going to be, you'll see in the draft regulations, is that we would be looking to amend these various sections. This is just for general cleanup relative to the HIP district, such as districts. We just have to add the HIP district as one of the districts that's in the zoning. The table of uses. In a few weeks, there will be a release of an amended table of uses, which goes through all the various uses that we want to see in the HIP district by right. Special permit are not allowed at all. And we'll get into that at a later date. The dimensional controls, everything, like I said previously, will stay intact as approved by special town meeting. We just have to include the acronym HIP, or Hartwell Innovation Park. The general regulations and off-street loading, and the table of loading requirements. One item that we do know from conversations is the number of loading docks is excessive for a lot of these developments as a minimum requirement. So we're going to be reducing those and basing it off of as needed. Also, we would have to amend site plan review to make sure that the process is streamlined. As previous speakers mentioned, developers and applicants and landowners want to know exactly what they have to do, what they will need to mitigate, and what they need to submit. That also, by us kind of amending the review process, will help streamline that process as well. Then we also have to amend the definitions to include definitions for the uses or different terminology that we are using. So those are just the general amendments. Next slide, please. So this is just the outline of the zoning bylaw. So we have a purpose and intent, what we're really trying to do. Then we have the design and site development standards. This is exactly what Ted had mentioned. We have standards and then we have design guidelines. They need to be kind of intertwined together to make sure that one works off the other. The design standards are within the bylaw, and those are going to kind of outline exactly how the site is laid out. Then we directly reference the guidelines within the bylaw as a shall have to be meet these requirements. We also provide a brief review of the application and the review requirements. And then also, as technology is continuously changing and zoning doesn't change as quickly, we are allowing for a review of uses and technologies that may be something that comes up that we've never seen before, but it would be up to the applicant to provide the education. The town would be able to have a peer review, actually review such technologies or uses to make sure that it is compatible with what we're trying to do, but it allows for that flexibility that the market is meeting. The waivers. So not all projects can fit into the same box, which is why we want to allow for waivers by a 4/5 vote to allow for better design when needed. Compliance, just kind of specifically calling out what developers need to do and not do. Also, so zoning it significantly impacts a community, but it also is one of those things that doesn't get reviewed very often. So we do have a provision in the bylaw that every 5 years that there would be a review of the Hartwell Innovation Park District, just to make sure that it is meeting the needs of the development community, but also the community, Lexington community itself. So next slide, please. So just a little bit more into the specifics. These would be the design standards. We want to make sure that there is a mixture of uses or a mixture of sizes of space to allow for that business diversity. If we only allow for large scale development, we are going to be missing those startup communities, entrepreneurs, mid-size. There's a very big demand in the market for 10,000, 15,000 square foot spaces, which is often hard to find. Also, new construction is also desirable, as is retrofitting. The site layout, we provide guidelines as to how the site should be laid out with a community amenity space in the front to make sure that there is a transition from the streetscape into the site, which allows the pedestrians, but also maneuvering between the areas. Outdoor amenities, as previously touched on by Mr. Buckley and Mr. Brovitz, we want to make sure that the people that work, but also visit the Hartwell area, have the ability kind of to move around the sites, not just stay on the property they might work on, but maybe go collaborate with other people that work elsewhere, but also have space. We are also going to be talking about transportation and circulation and parking, but also making sure that we hit on stormwater and erosion controls. On the October 29th presentation, we touched on stormwater, wetlands, and floodplains and constraints. We're going to be pulling some of that information into this bylaw as well. Alternative energy, sustainability, and best management practices.